it's a big pain in the butt to make, especially fighting with that soft boiled egg. And but I'll tell you, it's worth it. When you cut into it, that the yolk is like a gravy that covers over the sausage, so it's a really good thing. Nadia, let's get to the next slide. So, of course, what we're trying to reach out to is to the foodies and people who take their food seriously. These are the people that we'd like to kind of get involved with our culinary team. Mushrooms are fascinating on their own, but what's really cool is at the end of the day that you can come and bring them home and cook them up and do something with them. It's one of the big complaints I've always had is with some of the other outdoor activities like, geology. Geology is fine and fun and very interesting, except that you can't cook it up at the end of the day. The problem with the bird books is none of the bird books have any of the recipes in them. And so it's a challenge with the mushroom books, especially some of the older ones. You do get recipes as part of your mushroom field guide. So anyways, special moments happen around food, and we want to create a little bit more of them. So a couple of the things that we want to feature more and more about, besides having more social and food related events, we've got regular events where food is a big part of it. And one is the Wild Mushroom Expo, and we had that last year, and we're repeating it this year, and we hope to up our game this time, and we're going to need some good volunteers and some people who are really keen on making this thing a big success. But we've also got really good opportunities at things like the Great Alberta Mushroom Foray. One of the things that we want to do at the Great Alberta Mushroom Foray, for sure, starting this year, is to actually have a mycological section. So what we want is we'd like somebody from our culinary team to actually do a little food session and make something with the mushrooms that we've collected, the edible mushrooms that we've collected over the foray, and kind of have a cook and taste and a discussion and a little bit of learning and an opportunity to maybe taste some things that you haven't ever had before. In the long run, what we might also do with the mushroom foray is to see if we can actually contribute a little bit and maybe make a better potluck night on the first night, or maybe even take over a little bit of the catering, but that's a long-term dream to come through. One of the other things that we have food that's strongly involved is in the President's Dinner, and we've had some really great ones, and we've had some mediocre ones, and all kinds, and the really great ones are the best. But what we'd like actually the culinary team to do is to help participate in organizing these things. And one thing we might look at doing in the long run is seeing if we can bring in a celebrity chef or something for to make a really memorable event for us. Other events, and especially one that's coming up that Liz has been working on, is the solstice. And there I know that she needs a little bit of help. So any of you who are interested, and please reach out to us via email that you're interested in doing some stuff. So Liz, I'll let Liz talk a little bit about this at the end, because we're going to be reviewing this. The other thing that we used to do is we had pop-ups at assorted forays. So a lot of times I remember going out to leading a mushroom foray down in the Mill Creek Ravine, and Chad would show up with a pop-up tent and a stove, and we'd literally cook up the mushrooms that we find, and so it was just a real bonus for anybody who attended the foray. And we'd love to do a little bit more of this kind of stuff, but we need some people who would like to be able to actually facilitate that. One of the things that I've always wanted to do and we've never done, and this is something that a bunch of other societies do, and one of the ones is the Vancouver Island Society. They have a Chinese night, for example, in in January, and they go to one of the local Chinese restaurants, and the Chinese chefs prepare a mushroom-based dinner, and you can do that with all kinds of different food traditions, whether it's Ukrainian food or whether it's French food or German food or Japanese food, and it would be just an interesting way for people who are into eating mushrooms to learn different ways of presenting different things, get different tastes of the mushrooms. So these are things that we're working on right now. I'm personally working on one, on the Chinese one, and hopefully within the next couple of weeks we might have an announced date sometime in the summer for a mushroom night, at least in Edmonton. And we also have a bunch of people like Nadia and Sean who are from Calgary. And what we're trying to do is to not just do this in Edmonton, or not just to, what we want to do it is all over the province. And so no matter where you are, if you live in Hinton and you want to organize a mushroom night of eating, that's what we kind of want to see. And hopefully we'll have this stuff happening in both Edmonton and Calgary in different places. And the final thing is some potential culinary classes to actually work with some chefs. I've been talking with Sorrentino's. Chef Antonio does regular cooking classes, and I've asked him to look into doing a cooking class for the AMS to actually, cook mushrooms Italian style, and whether it's making raviolis or however they're doing it, that's something that we'll look at, and it'll probably be posted coming up sometime during the summer as well. And we hope that the same thing can happen in Calgary. There's culinary schools in Calgary, and there's, a few of them, and hopefully we can do some of that in both of our big cities. Anyway, so that's kind of what we've been talking about and where we want to go with this. And if you're interested, please reach out and participate, offer to participate. So next slide, or questions? I'll just carry on. You just interrupt me.
Yeah, we got a couple questions here. Pamela said, how do you handle the liabilities with serving or teaching people with about wild edible mushrooms?
Well, we do seminars like this or webinars like this. And actually, one of the things we'd like to do with and that's a really good question. One of the things that we would like to do once we start getting a culinary team together is to maybe have some of our people go through and do food safe courses, which are available both in person and online. And that might be something that the AMS would sponsor for members wanting to do something like that. So that's kind of one aspect of it. The really important thing with mushrooms, with cooking and preparing mushrooms, is making sure that the mushroom that's hitting the fry pan is actually an edible mushroom. And there's so many cases where you've heard of having poisonous mushrooms and things that are bad actually going into the mix, and if somebody's not paying attention to that. And that's something that the AMS has been doing for forever, is trying to teach people how to positively identify their mushrooms. Anyways, the other thing about mushrooms is that lots of mushrooms are just unique. They're priceless, because sometimes you just cannot, you can't go out and buy them. You have to find them, and you don't know when you'll find them. Sometimes they're decades in between finding them. And when you have one of these amazingly choice mushrooms, what is the best way to prepare these delicacies, and also what is the best way to preserve these mushrooms. And these are kind of topics that we're going to deal with in the culinary team. So let's go to the next slide. So the theme really tonight is, in the education part, is safety. And NAMA did a poll of all of their members, kind of an impromptu poll, and it showed that about 5% of all members have had some gastrointestinal events. So what does that mean? Well, it means that because NAMA members are generally knowledgeable and they know their mushrooms, and they're cautious, and they, in spite of all of that, about 5% of all members have had some type of gastrointestinal event. I've been lucky. I think I've had one, but it's been really, really mild. Actually, I might have had two, but both really, really mild. Very, very fortunate about that. More specifically with morels, we also hear that morels, which is our delicious edible choice mushroom, people get sick and poisoned with those as well, and that's probably about 1 in 200 people. So what's going on with these things? What's happening that people are getting poisoned from mushrooms that probably are not poisonous? They're edible mushrooms. People don't eat poisonous mushrooms, especially NAMA members, and we're hoping the same thing happens to AMS members. Next slide or question. So first thing is misidentification. So this is really rare. Well, it's rare. There are mistakes that can be made sometimes when people are gathering mushrooms, and this is kind of the story of the horse whisperer fella. I can't remember his name, but he ended up getting poisoned by a cortinarius, and a cortinarius, most of our members should know, is a gilled mushroom with rusty brown spores and little cortina underneath, little hairy cortina underneath. And they were out picking porcini or king paletes, which don't have gills at all. They have pores. And in this pile of mushrooms that they picked, there was one of these cortinarius. So I mean, something that's really easy to tell apart one from the other. So it isn't a mistake. It's just somebody not being careful. And so ended up that the porcini or the cortinarius got into the pot, and a couple of people got really badly poisoned. In fact, the fellow himself had to have a kidney transplant, thanks to his daughter, which he needed so he could survive. And so there's mistakes that happen, and having a chef that actually, or the person, the gatekeeper at the fry pan, is really important to have somebody who knows what they're doing. But other than that, typically people don't make a lot of mistakes. You don't typically pick a lot of poisonous mushrooms, especially deadly poisonous mushrooms. Mind you, there are some optimists. I had years ago, I met a fella that would say that he would eat them, and how he'd tell the edible ones from the non-edible ones, from the poisonous ones, is with a pendulum. So he'd hold the pendulum over top of the mushroom, and then I can't remember, if it spun clockwise, you could eat it. If it spun counterclockwise, you couldn't eat it. And I'm just thinking he's optimistic at best. And you hear that from some people, and some people just kind of say, well, I'm in touch with nature, and I had just a really good feeling about this mushroom. And often, you might have a good feeling, and sometimes you might get a very bad feeling. One of the interesting things that NAMA has done, the North American Mycological Association, they did a survey last year, and they're going to do it again, repeat it again this year, where it's called the commercial mushroom mycoblitz. And what they're doing is they got people from all over North America to go and buy their commercial mushrooms, whether it's at a farmer's market or at the grocery store or one of the cultural markets, whether they're bagged or canned or whatever. Actually, the can they couldn't really deal with very well, but all the dried mushrooms. And they sent it in for DNA testing. And they found that, I think about 70% of them are mislabeled. And so a lot of times with the wild mushroom mixes and things like that, you don't know where you're where you're getting, and I think that just came out in the last Mycofile, which is the newsletter of NAMA, which if anybody's a member, they should go and look that up. So, things, sometimes you think you're getting something safe and you're actually getting something completely different. Next slide. So in here, go ahead, actually, let's talk about this. So misidentification. Well, here we've got a true morel, and underneath to the side, to the right, we've got a false morel. False morels are known to be especially toxic. False morels also generally have a compound called gyromitrin in them that has lots of that is carcinogenic. And in spite of that, in Europe, people eat it, and in spite of that, every year there's a few cases of a few deaths from eating this mushroom. For me, I don't know how you can confuse the two. I've said for years and years that if you can't tell the difference between a true morel and a false morel, then you shouldn't be in the gene pool, and it's just that simple. And anyways, let's go to the next slide. So a lot of times with identification and misidentification, you have to kind of gauge your skill as an identifier. And there's mushrooms that are really easy to identify. So for example, the hericiums, that's the lion's mane and the comb's tooth and the hedgehogs. Those guys are real simple to identify, and you shouldn't have a whole lot of problems with them. And there isn't a lot of lookalikes to those. Something that's moderate is an oyster mushroom, and a lot of people think that oyster mushrooms are easy, and they probably are, but there are some things that you can confuse an oyster mushroom with, like a lentinellus, which isn't poisonous, but it doesn't taste really good. And there's hohenbulia, which is another one that kind of looks the same. And then there's crepidotus, which is kind of like a small little one with the brown spores, which, again, I don't think there's any poisonings in North America ever associated with it, but it does have dark brown spores, so it's really not an oyster. So there are some things you can confuse it with, but oysters, again, are generally fairly safe. And then there's some harder mushrooms, and that's kind of when you get into all of the white spored gill mushrooms. I mean, there's some real poisonous ones in that group, and sometimes it's difficult. Well, it's possible to miss some of the features. So as you get more skilled as an identifier, then you can delve more into that. And some of those ones are especially the tricholomas, the ones with the white spored with the notched gills. Sometimes they're a little bit confusing, and there's some really good edibles there, and there's some poisonous ones there. And so you need to be a little more careful. You got to sign up for a Great Alberta Mushroom Foray and come out and learn firsthand. Have both the lookalikes and the proper ones in your hand in front of you, and you can tell the difference to that. Let's go to the next slide. So, of course, the morel here, which is a choice edible mushroom, is also toxic if it's not prepared properly. So if it's eaten raw, it's toxic. The single largest mushroom poisoning in North America happened from raw morel served in a salad in a hotel in Vancouver. 77 people were hospitalized at a banquet of, I think, somewhere around 400 for a retiring police chief back in the 90s. Single largest case. But we hear more stuff happening with morels, and there's some disturbing stuff happening. So in Montana, in Bozeman, a couple of years ago, people were ordering actually Chinese mushrooms, the commercially grown ones, and not that they're a problem. I mean, they're like every other mushroom. If it's not cooked properly, then it has toxins in it. They were served raw in sushi, and what they did is they took the mushrooms and they put them in a cold marinade of soy sauce and ginger and some different things, and marinated them, and then they served it up in sushi. And out of that restaurant, there was 2 deaths and 51 people were sickened enough to be taken to hospital. And so again, delicious choice mushroom, but you need to know how to prepare it. So also at about the same time, there was a family or a couple of friends that went out on a canoe trip. Actually, there's 4 of them, and one fellow was a long time morel aficionado. He knew his morels, and he knew how to deal with them. And he's eaten morels for years and years and decades, and he brought a bunch of dried morels along on his canoe trip, and and then he prepared it, and he took the dried morels and he put it into a soup mix that they were making, and to make kind of a stew soup, and and for some unknown reason, there's some speculation that that the two of them that ate the mushrooms got really, really sick. And one of the fellows, actually the most experienced guy, who picked the mushrooms, he passed away. And he probably wouldn't have passed away if they could have gotten him to a hospital, because it was the diarrhea and the vomiting, and just supportive care probably would have got him through. But because of his out in the wild, they couldn't do that. And the question here is, well, number one is, are dried morels okay? A lot of people ask me that, can you just use dried morels, crunch them up and put them on stuff? Well, maybe not. We're not really sure. So that might be what happened here. And he didn't have his pot of stew or soup boiling enough to actually breathe off all of these toxins. Or the other thing that could be happening, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, people build up a tolerance to some mushrooms, and all of a sudden you can eat them for years, and if you overeat, you reach a critical point where all of a sudden your body just has this horrible reaction to it. And so with morels, I think this would be one of the greatest tragedies ever if you got to the point where you couldn't eat morels anymore. There's one guy in Nama, the president, actually, he can't even touch them. It's his favorite thing, picking morels, and he would have gone out for years and years. That was his spring ritual. Now to go and pick them, he actually has to put latex gloves on, because he reacts to them even when he picks them. And to me, that's a tragedy. Anyways, next slide or question. So the other thing that it seems that where people get sick is from undercooking mushrooms. So this is one of the things, always cook your mushrooms. As far as we know, the only mushroom that you can safely eat uncooked raw are truffles, and the black truffles or the white truffles. But then again, you're not eating an awful lot of them. You're eating very thin slices. When that little golf ball sized truffle costs you, $500 or $600, you're not eating a lot of them at any one sitting. That's for sure. So anyways, let's go to the next slide. So first of all, undercooking any mushroom can give you problems. Even mushrooms like the button mushrooms that you get on salad bars. There's all kinds of different cases where they have some association with stomach cancers and different things like that. And of course, the button mushrooms don't taste like anything as well. To me, when you eat the salad bar mushroom, it usually tastes like ranch dressing, because that's the only taste that's on it, is the ranch dressing you dipped it in. So undercooked for all mushrooms, but particularly red tops, honey mushrooms, shaggy manes, and morels. And these 4 especially show up on on the NAMA poisoning reports. And so these are really common gastrointestinal poisons. So again, like morels, we talked about 1 in every 200 people. And that can certainly come from undercooking them. So cook them really, really well. Personally, what I do with Lexinums is the red tops, I put them in a pressure cooker. And whether I'm making sauces or soups, I pressure cook it, and I find that the flavor comes out way better the more cooked they are, and that's just a really good way of doing that. Let's go to the next slide. So here, that's the one, caramelized. So with all of your mushrooms, and especially the morels, this is how you want them to look. Like this, you cut them in half, and you cook them really well, and you make sure that everything's just, all of those potential toxins are neutralized, and the better, the more caramelization, the more what they call the Maillard reaction, where sugars stick to proteins and taste really, really good. This is the safest and the tastiest way to eat the morels. Let's go to the next slide. So, this is a concern. So here we've got chicken breast and morels in cream sauce, and what they've done here is they haven't pre-cooked the morels. They've just thrown them in with the cream sauce. And the problem with the cream sauce is kind of max out at 150 degrees, and a lot of times even less. If you take it any more than that, then it separates, and potentially you have some trouble. So again, what do? Go back to the previous slide. Cook them and then put them in the cream sauces. That's what you want to do. Let's go to the next slide. And in some cases, that is an issue for some people, and sometimes this is kind of a phenomenon that we're hearing about. And I know that traditional Ukrainian cooking has them boiled in milk or cream, but make sure you cook them really well. Now, this is a really bad idea. Especially if you're going to close that bag up and trap everything inside. Are you getting and keeping the mushrooms whole? Are you getting them cooked well enough? In this case, probably not. And so potentially there's issues to be had with this. And let's go to the next slide. And this one is possibly a really bad idea. And these are breaded whole morels. And one of the things that I do, actually, I should have dug out a picture of it, where I actually stuff my big morels, and I stuff them with cream cheese and smoked salmon, and it's very, very tasty. But then I bake the hell out of them in the oven with garlic butter, and you just need to cook them really, really well. But again, are you cooking them well enough on the inside of the morel or not? Anyways, so this is possibly a really bad idea, but who knows? This is one of the things that we would love to hear about. If you make your morels this way and you do good, tell us about it. And if it doesn't work out that good for you, share that with us as well. So let's go to the next slide.
We just have a quick question here from
Sure.
Mike. What's the specific temperature morels should be cooked to?
They don't know, because they're looking at some of those. So the issue is they're looking at. They know that 187, I think, is a temperature for some of the hydrazines, but there's a spectrum in that, and the other thing that happens with morels is there's a bunch of different compounds, and some of those compounds they're not really sure about. So besides the gastrointestinal stuff, there is also, in morels, there's also a neurotoxin, which basically creates dizziness and lightheadedness. And so that's one of the symptoms in a morel poisoning. And they're generally thinking that this is a neurotoxin. One of the things with a false morel that we just briefly touched on that you shouldn't eat, even though people do. I mean, but in Europe, they've just discovered that there's some connection between ALS and eating that mushroom, and also Parkinson's disease. So whatever's happening in the false morel is probably happening to a lesser degree in the morels, and they just need to be really cooked to kind of neutralize that that unknown neurotoxin. So one day we will know, I'm sure, because there's people looking for PhD theses all the time, and somebody's going to figure it out.
So what Martin's saying is you want your morels cooked very, very well done.
Exactly. Next slide. So overconsumption. Overconsumption is the other thing that should be it. And typically mushrooms should always be a side dish, or they should be part of something else, like mushroom risotto. You got a bunch of rice and you got a bunch of some mushrooms flavoring it. Mushroom soup with onions and different kind of stock and carrots and all the stuff in it, barley, whatever you're putting in with your in your mushroom soup. The mushrooms aren't the main, are just a component. Same thing with pasta with a mushroom sauce. Mushrooms on toast, that's great, because you're not just, don't sit down just for a big bowl of mushrooms, because you'll get yourself into trouble. And one of the things that the Catholics have always known is that gluttony is one of the deadly sins, and just be careful. It's really a thing. So let's go to the next slide. And which mushrooms? Interesting. The same as the undercooked ones. Lexinums, armillaria, honey mushrooms, shaggy maids, and morels. These are the ones. And the issue with these ones, amazingly, from undercooking, also from overconsumption, and these are the mushrooms that you find by the ton at times. I mean, with red tops, I've been out where you don't need a basket, and honey mushrooms the same. You need a wheelbarrow and a dump truck or a pickup truck to kind of load up all the mushrooms that you can find. And then the big challenge is seeing how many you can't eat, that you shouldn't eat, that you should hold back from consuming. One of the reasons for that, there may be unknown toxins in some of these mushrooms. And some of the things like lexinums and honey mushrooms and morels, we're kind of grouping big groups of mushrooms as part of calling them one thing, but they're actually different species. There's multiple species of lexinums, and there might be a bad one that's potentially has a toxin in it that nobody's identified. But one of the big things that they are finding, and they're pretty sure of, is that because mushrooms are antibacterial, because they're duking it out with bacteria all the time, that if you have huge amounts of it, you can knock out your gut flora, and then you can get gastrointestinal distress. And like I like to say, that it's memorable gastrointestinal distress. It's something you'll remember for years. And typically you can't go back and eat that mushroom for a year or two until you've really gotten over it. So overconsumption, be careful on how much you consume, and you don't have to pick every mushroom, and you don't have to eat it. Let's go to the next slide. So spoiled mushrooms. Well, you take a look at these three morels. The one on the far right is the choice, is a nice one. The other one's kind of getting a little bit old. You can see it's drying out around the stem. And then we find these other ones that are just partially dried. And Well, I must say, on the lean years, my logic when I'm out in the field and picking is that, well, I'm going to dehydrate it anyways. So it's two-thirds of the way to dehydration. And that actually generally has worked not bad. But what I strongly, strongly recommend is that you pick up the mushroom and you give it the smell test, because it could have all kinds of different bacteria on it, and it might be the bacteria that spoiled it. And depending on what bacteria it is, it could make you quite ill. So watch for that. Let's go to the next slide. And also in that is contaminated mushrooms. And again, I'm going to go back to the morels. But there's other things other than morels as well. Morels and most mushrooms are known to be concentrators of heavy metals. So there has been documented morel poisonings from people picking mushrooms in old apple orchards that are defunct because they've used so much chemical on there, and heavy metal chemicals like lead and mercury and stuff like that, and that becomes concentrated into the mushroom itself. And so all of a sudden now it can be a vehicle for heavy metals, and you can literally get mercury poisoning from eating those morels. So there's always a concern of eating mushrooms like especially shaggy manes that grow along boulevard and road edges, especially along old roads where that there's been lots of leaded gas vehicle travel on it, so there's lots of leaded gas, that a lot of lead in the ground. So you have to just be careful. So watch for contaminated mushrooms, not just bacterial, but metals. One of the things that we're going to be doing this year, we've applied for a citizen science project to collect morels in Jasper Park. I don't know if any of you have heard, but last year there was a fire in Jasper. And so this year we've applied for a permit to go and pick mushrooms, pick the morels there. And if anybody wants to volunteer for that, reach out to contact us at Alberta Mushrooms. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sequencing all of the mushrooms to find out actually what species we've got there, if we get the permit. And then after we've got the species, we're actually sending it off. We've got a lab at the U of A who's actually going to test all the morels for heavy metals. So we're going to try and test the burn morels and compare them to regular morels and see what if any of those actually carry way more heavy metals than the other ones. Okay, next slide. And so finally, again, so this is from Mike Bugh, who was the toxicology chair at NAMA for many years. So he says there's a bunch of species that hyperaccumulate toxins, and a lot of these are metals, but there's other toxicity, and sometimes you have mushrooms that depending on the age or the part of the mushroom you're eating, or again preparation methods, undercooking, or specific habitats that can change the levels of toxins in different mushrooms. And so what do you do with that? Just be aware, and again, go back to the thing, don't overconsume. Have a decent amount of mushrooms and enjoy your mushrooms, and continue eating them. And I have to say now, I hope that I'm not scaring anybody, because it's not meant to. The overriding thing also to remember is that people who eat one meal of mushrooms a week, in general, the statistics say that they have a 16% lower chance of all-cause mortality. So mushroom eaters just literally live longer. And if you eat 2 big meals of mushrooms a week, it goes up to 39% less mortality. So mushrooms overall are really good for us, but at the same time, we just still have to be a little bit cautious with them and sensible. Let's go to the next slide. So here's another one. Here's a contaminated mushroom. So one of my favorites, lobster mushrooms. And so there's more and more lobster mushroom poisonings that have happened, have been reported. And So luckily, none on our Alberta green lobsters are Hypomyces luteovirens. No reporting of any issues with these. But the trick with these ones is that you have to watch that the really old ones, the old ones that are starting to get a little bit dark crimson patches on it, and you could see on the stem of the one that you see a couple of really dark patches. When that turns out really dark kind of burgundy, those are mushrooms that may be contaminated, or it might be that the mushrooms fighting off, creating a defense against the bacteria that's trying to attack it in the woods. These are really super long-lived mushrooms. Paul Kroger, who is a regular mycologist who comes to our Great Alberta Mushroom Forays, he's a poison control guy for BC, and they were getting these reports. So he took some of this stuff and he extracted compounds, just alcohol extractions, and he tried them on 6 different bacteria in culture plates, and it killed everything. It killed all on all 6 plates. So it didn't matter which of the 6 bacteria he used. That's what was happening. So potentially that's very encouraging, if you're looking for something that's against a drug resistant bacteria, the lobster mushroom might be our answer. But at the same time, the older ones we have to be careful with. And again, memorable gastrointestinal distress. Next slide. So what's the next one? Increasing sensitivities and intolerance. So I mentioned this with the morels especially, but you're also finding with lexinums and honey mushrooms and several other edible species, you can develop a sensitivity to it. And once you've developed a sensitivity, typically it gets worse. And so if you've had a sensitivity, again, when you're eating the same mushroom again, be careful with it. Do it in smaller amounts. And the one thing to remember is that doesn't mean that you're sensitive to all mushrooms. You're sensitive to that specific mushroom that you're consuming, or maybe that genera. If it's lexinums or honey mushrooms, it doesn't matter which one you might have. But so just be aware of that. And this again goes back to item number 3: overconsumption. Don't overconsume. Don't make yourself intolerant to different mushrooms. Let's go to the next slide. And heightened issues with associated alcohol use. Actually, let's just go to the next slide again. So alcohol is implicated in all kinds of things. Lexinum poisonings and morel poisonings, especially Verpa early morel poisonings. You hear those with especially red wine, and I don't hear a lot of reports with white wine, and I certainly don't hear any reports with beer. And it just seems that red wine's the culprit with a bunch of different mushrooms. So pay attention when you're consuming your red wine, because sometimes that might have an issue with against some people. And it's not everybody at the table. It might be just one person at the table who all of a sudden becomes much more sensitive to it. Of course, there is the alcohol inky cap, which potentially stops the body from breaking down alcohol. That's a whole different poisoning that comes around. And that's literally a poison mushroom if you drink. Anyways, next slide. Or question. Nothing? Excellent. So other poisonous edible mushrooms. So these are the statistics from the last NAMA toxicology report that was published for 2018 to 2020, so pre-COVID, and 130 reported mushroom poisonings. And as we go through, you'll see how many of these 130 are from specific mushrooms. Of course, there's probably way more mushroom poisonings. These are just the ones that came through NAMA and through some of the NAMA them associated clubs. So here are the numbers. Let's go. Next slide. There it is. Our agaricus species, even the ones you buy in the store, there's a whole bunch of poisonings from agaricus button mushrooms that you've store bought. So 15 cases of agaricus poisonings from agaricus. So, and part of it could be all kinds of different things, but a lot of times, sometimes it's you see one that's just on the edge and you probably know that you shouldn't eat it, but you fire it in there anyways. And so try and resist doing stuff like that. I know that I'm guilty of that at times. So watch your agaricus. Again, delicious edible species, but again, overconsumption, make sure that it's not bad. There's certainly not any toxins in it other than possible antibiotics that might disrupt your gut. Next slide. Shiitake. So we've had 2 cases of shiitake gastrointestinal distress. And shiitake is a really well-known strong antibacterial mushroom. So that might be related to that. Lots of research around shiitake. It's super medicinal. It has all kinds of different medicinal characteristics. So maybe some of those things just aren't agreeing with you. But the biggest thing is this shiitake dermatitis syndrome. There's 4 cases of that, and that's only from eating shiitake raw, and it looks like you've been, they call it a flagellated rash. So it looks like you've been whipped with like a cat o' nine tails. You have all of these streaks across your back, and actually the skin just about breaking on that, and it's terribly, terribly painful. But again, that comes from eating raw shiitake. So don't do that. And watching your sushi. I never order shiitake in my sushi because I don't know if they've cooked it or not, and it makes me a little bit nervous. Mind you, I'm not eating huge amounts there, but anyways, just something to keep to be cognizant of. Honey mushrooms. Lots of mushroom poisonings with honey mushrooms. And again, why? Well, honey mushrooms are a bit of a problem as well, because we have several species of honey mushrooms in Alberta, and there's like I think 15 species of honey mushrooms across North America, and most of those you can't tell apart without DNA sequencing or being really, really, really knowledgeable about them and doing a real big time dive into them. So honey mushrooms, and there's so many of them. When they come, you get them by the ton, and again, antibacterial, and you can do yourself a big time mischief with them. Let's go to the next slide. Lexinum, 7 cases. So this is probably the most one, other than the portobellas, the agaricus. This one is number 2 in line for causing the most gastrointestinal distress. And from some of the people I've talked to who've had it, it is a memorable thing. And we read the kind of stuff and we think, gastrointestinal distress. Well, who hasn't had gastrointestinal distress? I certainly have. And do you worry about it? And it was Michael Quo who I was talking to, from mushroomexpert.com. He said, yep. And he was kind of the same way. What's a little gastrointestinal distress? And he said, after spending 6 hours sitting on the toilet, throwing up into the sink and filling the toilet and passing out on his bathroom floor, says that's gastrointestinal distress. And again, so where do we see the toxic effects or the poisoning effects? From the red tops, from the orange ones. And again, same question with the honey mushrooms. Is there one species that's different? We have multiple species of red tops in the province, and you can't figure out what they are just we just don't have enough information about what species we have, and one of those red species might be toxic. But the interesting thing with the red species is that you see tons of them. Like when they come out, there's tons. And you see like the black or the brown or the gray, you never see tons of those. And there's never any relationship with any of the dark, like the Lexinum snellii, the black red top, or the white red top, or the gray red top, or the ochre red top. Don't have problems with those, just with the orange ones. And again, the orange ones come out by the thousand. Let's go to the next slide. Morels, we've talked about that ad nauseum, 6 cases. Ad nauseum, bad pun. Chicken of the woods, there's another one, has a lot of upset stomach. So we don't have a ton of chicken of the woods. We do have some in Alberta, and we have 2 kinds here. Well, we may have 3 kinds of chicken of the woods. And again, you have to be careful and see what they're growing on. It appears that the chicken of the woods that grows on conifer is the really problematic one. It's a mushroom that's called Latiparus conifercola. Cola to love, and it loves conifers. So those ones typically you don't want to eat. The one that we do have is probably Latiparus sulphureus, and it might also be another one called Gilbertsonii. And those are ones that kind of typically grow on aspens and poplars, and those are fairly safe and really tasty. You know, I've only found them once or twice in large enough quantities that I could actually take them home and eat them. And honestly, they taste like chicken. You know, they and it's quite good. But would I rather have chicken? I'd have to think about that. I mean, on principle, I'd eat the mushroom, but the chicken actually might be better. Anyways, let's go to the next slide. So here's our inky caps. So there's our shaggy manes. So of course there's the alcohol inky, the Caprinopsis atramenteria. It looks a little bit different. It's a little grows in big clumps and base of trees and things like that, and it's much more delicate. But that has a compound called coprine in it, and in some cases it will stop the body from digesting or breaking down alcohol, and literally you get alcohol poisoning. And from that, typically you have racing heart, and you end up with having irregular heartbeats and tachycardia and different things like that, plus general sickness all over. But with the Comprinus comatus, the shaggy mane, you get GI distress, and in fact you get more GI distress from the shaggy mane than people get poisonings from the inky caps. So way more from that. So again, part of the issue with the inky caps may be the undercooking, because you got to get it quick. And what I do with my inky caps, and I'll some of them I'll take and I'll just ram into a jar and let them just all turn to black ink, and then I put it through a sieve and retain the liquid, and then I use it as a color. So if you want to make anything where you use squid ink and you want to have a mushroom flavored dark dye, then in it goes, whether it's in a sauce or whether it's in the pasta or in whatever you want. It's quite good. And it's also super healthy, because these melanins that make the mushroom black are probably the strongest antioxidants that we can get, and they're super healthy. Antioxidants neutralize all the radical oxygen species that are reacting and breaking apart bits of you, functional bits of you. They're causing cancers, and they're causing all kinds of stuff like that. So really healthy food compounds. Interestingly enough, University of Saskatchewan is working on using some of these dark melanized fungi to protect yourself from radioactive exposure. So they found in Chernobyl that some of these really black mushrooms, these highly melanized fungi, were actually crawling to the hot spots of the radioactive stuff and encasing it and literally eating the radioactivity kind of one electron at a time, kind of similar to how photosynthesis happens, you know, as the energy just waves across all of the leaf. And so very similar. So they're finding that maybe it can protect your gut. So I've been actually keeping this aside and keeping little jars of it for myself, just in case, especially after Putin invaded the Ukraine, in case I ever had to have a nuclear holocaust party. You know, I know what was going to be on the menu, and it was going to be this. And hopefully in that process, I end up protecting my gut. Anyways, with shaggy means 2 cases out of the 130. Let's go to the next slide. Chanterelles, 7 cases with chanterelles. And not that much with the tubiformis. That's the one that we have in Alberta. But I can tell you for sure, in 2005, we had our first ever Great Alberta Mushroom Foray at Crimson Lake, and we found these chanterelles by the ton. And we picked them by the ton and we ate them. We had soups, omelets, all kinds of side dishes, all kinds of stuff. And I'll tell you, gastrointestinal distress, not really nasty gastrointestinal distress, but I'll tell you, there was lineups going to the outhouses at that foray. And there's a lot of argument. Was it the chanterelles or was it the sauerkraut? And just looking at the chanterelle, yeah, I'm going, it was the chanterelle. But anyways, next slide. So, and also, like I said at the beginning, spoiled mushrooms, when they go bad and they look like this in the field, leave them there. And in fact, my general rule is, if I wouldn't pay for the mushroom, if I'm in a grocery store and I'm saying, I'm not paying for this guy, that's my same rule for out in the wild. If I'm not willing to pay for that, it's staying out in the wild and doing a whole bunch of good there rather than you dragging it home. Next slide. So before we get into this, let's go to any questions if we have any. Or open it up for questions. Now is the time.
Did you want to ask those poll questions or hold on?
Oh, sure. Yeah, let's look at the poll questions.
Yep. So I'm going to publish a couple polls here. So one of them is, have you ever experienced any mushroom poisoning, either mild or intensive? Another question here is, have you ever had an incident with morels or early morels? And the last question, I'll hold off on.
Okay.
So some people voted yes, and some people voted no. So for the people that voted yes, do you want to put in the chat what was your experience with it? And we've had no issues with morels.
Excellent. No issues with morels, because what's our group here? How many people do we have? 30?
18.
18. Oh, okay. So 18 people. Yeah, so kind of 1 out of every 200, so I'm not surprised. So how many in the yes, they've had a bad mushroom reaction?
Just 2 so far.
So 2 out of 18. Yeah, there we are. So times 5, that's 10. That's double the NAMA standard of 5%. That's a full 10%. Interesting, and hopefully that can drop with the discussions that we've had here.
Yeah,
so
perfect. If you guys have questions, just put it in the chat, and I'll read it out to Martin here. No
excellent.
questions so far, though.
And I'll just carry on a little bit on the culinary team. So moving forward, you know, if anybody's interested, please reach out to us. You know, I mean, we're going to reach out to people anyways for volunteers for stuff like the Wild Mushroom Expo and whatnot. But we'd like to kind of figure out exactly what we're doing, and we're going to work together and work out menus and work together and try and make a much more professional kitchen than we had last year. And right from menu planning to prep to serving and all the way through cleanup and have that opportunity of tasting the mushrooms. One of the other things we wanted to do with the culinary team is work with people and hopefully get some mushroom donations. So when we're out at big forays or even prepare someplace like the Great Alberta Mushroom Foray, is to have a bit of a crew that can pull a lot of the edibles that don't need to be sequenced and put into the herbarium, and dry those and basically create an inventory of mushrooms that we can work with at all kinds of events like the Wild Mushroom Expo, or give it to chefs at the President's Dinner, or use it in all kinds of different events that we have. So this is, one of the tasks that we want to have a big group of people who are kind of keen and into that and working on stuff like that. So email us, and once we get a kind of a list, we're probably going to just hold an open Zoom meeting where we can kind of talk about this stuff and get feedback from everybody who's interested, and find out what everybody's interested in doing, that type of stuff. I know that Liz needs some help on the solstice event, which is happening on the solstice, June 21st, I guess.
Yep.
Liz,
Before I let you go, Liz, we got a question here too. So what is your opinion on how many people get sick from the mushroom itself or from the pathogenic bacteria on the mushroom from undercooking?
That's really hard to say. It's probably more from the well, it might be from two things. From undercooking, I mean, you can get a pathogenic bacteria on it, but a lot of times what you're also doing is you're not neutralizing toxins. So, for example, I know that because I spent a lot of time and interest in the medicinal mushroom world reading papers, and I've just read a paper that came out where they looked at doing cold extractions. So typically when people deal with medicinal mushrooms, they do an alcohol extraction, and then they do a kind of a decoction, a hot water decoction, or a hydrolysate, again, which is with hot water. And what they were doing is they were doing some extractions using cold extractions, and they were getting actually different toxins coming out with the compounds that they were extracting from the mushrooms, because they weren't being neutralized. So that might be what's happening. So it might not just be a pathogenic fungus on it. It might just be that you haven't neutralized whatever's going on that's toxic inside the mushroom.
Another question here from Ashley. What's everyone's favorite mushroom to eat?
My favorite
I would say morel.
My favorite mushroom is the one that's in my frying pan at the time. There's so many good mushrooms. It's just, I mean, hericium and the Combs tooth are delicious, and so are morels. Morels are a big favorite, and but so are the shaggy parasols. They're such a rich, strong tasting mushroom. They're lovely. Honey mushrooms are lovely.
Brett says saffron milk cap.
Hmm?
That's one I haven't tried, so that's interesting. Another question here from Kathy is boiling the morel twice, then frying it too much?
No, and actually that's one of the things that some people do, and I do that with when I prepare russelas, and hopefully at some point when we're out in the field, we'll get to do some of that, maybe at Ganff or maybe at some other place. With russelas, typically with russelas, they're hard to identify, so a lot of people are really hesitant to eat them, and generally I eat them all. but I taste them to make sure that they're not really acidy, really hot, doesn't burn your tongue like you've bitten into a habanero pepper, and stuff like that. But what I always start is I start with liquid in a pan with some onions, a little bit of garlic, and then literally boil it. And the liquid could be white wine, or it could be stock, or just plain old water. And you cook it down, and some fat, and you cook it down till all the liquid's gone. And then you've neutralized all of that stuff. You've cooked it really, really well. And then you basically can caramelize it. And you'd think that anything that you've boiled the hell out of like that would be mushy and bad, but no, you still get a really crispy, caramelization on the mushroom. And then finish it off with a little bit of cream and some sherry or some Madeira, preferably, and cheese, a little bit of cheese, Emmentaler.
Mitch wants to know: do you lose flavor by cooking it so much?
No, actually, you get flavor from it. Like I was mentioning earlier, if you eat the raw button mushroom from the salad bar, it has no taste on it. And the more you cook it, the better the taste is. And I find that with Lexinums, with pressure cooking them, I find that they're just superior. And I'll even do that with Suilus. Suilus are the spongy little ones that are slimy an awful lot. And if you cook the hell out of them, like in a pressure cooker, they lose some of the sliminess, and you can make just beautiful, like chicken stews with Suilus. And Suilus is such a common mushroom that we have. Like, we've got about 5 or 6 really common Suilus, and usually you can get more than you'd ever imagine ever to eat. And but just dealing with it sometimes is hard. Good advice from our friend Bill, who's got such practical, Bill Richards, who's one of our life members. He's got such a good practicality. And I said, I don't like these Suilus. They're too slimy, And he says, well, put them into something that's wet. And I'm going, yeah, what was I thinking? So put it in something that's wet, and you don't notice any of that stuff, and they're excellent.
Mai's question here is: should you wash mushrooms?
That's a very good question. So it depends. It depends on how much time you have and how picky you are. And so what you can do, mushrooms can be washed. A lot of people say they can't be. You can wash them, and you can wash them well. But what you have to do is, after you wash them, you have to set them aside for like 6 to 8 hours, and sometimes overnight, because they'll reabsorb the water. And if you don't do that, then they will end up being kind of slimy and soggy. So let them rehydrate, let the excess water again breathe off a little bit. And so that's what you find a lot of restaurants do with mushrooms. They'll pre-wash them the night before, and then just leave them overnight, and then you can be happy with how clean you've made them. But don't wash them if you're going to cook them right away. Then it's, unless you're putting them in soup, then who cares? Because that's going to be wet and whatever. But you can't get the caramelization when it's wet. It's kind of like when you're doing a duck breast or anything like that. You dry it off before you put it in the frying pan to get that nice caramelization on it. And mushrooms are the same. If they're wet, they're not going to caramelize, and you're going to lose a lot of the flavors.
Kathy has a follow-up question to that. Where do you leave them overnight after washing?
Typically, I'll put them in a cupboard, or if it's not overly hot in the house, or in a cold room, or in the fridge if I've got room in the fridge, and just kind of in between a couple of sheets of paper towel works, or actually any towel. Don't need to be paper towel. Away you go.
Perfect. That's it for questions so far.
Right. Liz, do you want to talk about the solstice? What you need and what's happening?
Okay, so can you hear me? Am I on?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. Right. Okay, solstice is from the Friday the 20th of June to Sunday the 22nd of June. So first of all, my first comment to people that are in on this forum, and we have 18 of us, please come. Please come camping. You don't have to come camping. You can just come and spend the day. But it is a group campground that we've taken. And it's the first time that I know of that we've done this. Usually we're in a community hall where we have marvelous things like ovens and hot plates and hot and cold running water. None of that we will have because we are in a group camping situation where we are going to have fire pits, and I don't know what's actually in the kitchen shelter itself, except that it has a chimney. I'm hoping to get a chance to get down there and have a look, see if I can get a peek inside the shelter. I've asked the staff there, and their comment was, don't know, but it's got a chimney. So I'm assuming it's going to be one of those stoves or something. So we will be inventing ways of cooking things. So I'd like a little assistance with that. On the plan so far is on the Friday night, there will be a kind of meet and greet wiener roast with a build your own stick. So we will provide a certain amount of things to put on sticks, peppers, mushrooms, onions, that type of thing. And you just build your own stick and roast it over the fire pit. So that's the first thing we're doing. And then I plan on doing up a breakfast, mainly because I've got a really, really cool pan that I want to use, which sounds ridiculous, but you wait till you see it. So I'm planning on doing a light breakfast for people, and then you can have your own nibbles and dibbles for lunch, and then we're doing the dinner. And this year I actually already have 3 foot of pork, which is basically it's a pork loin. It's a complete pork loin, and it is maybe an inch short of 3 foot, but I've cooked these before on a barbecue and they're brilliant. They're really nice. So I'm going to do that up, and then I'm relying on the guests coming to bring additional bits and bobs for a potluck. So I would like to see everybody in this forum there over the weekend with dish in hand. I only actually need a couple of volunteers to just give a hand to things. Usually people that are there for the meal anyway, everybody kind of pitches in and lends a hand. So I'm not too concerned about that. 3 foot of pork does take a certain amount of time to actually barbecue up nicely. So we'll probably have to have a team of people keeping an eye on it just so it doesn't incinerate, being as how we have these marvelously uncontrolled fires. And then throughout the day, there will be forays arranged. People will go off and do them. So any mushrooms that you find that you're sure are edible, I'll take all the chanterelles you can find. We will cook them up and add them to the dinner. And then as an extra bonus, and I'm waiting for final confirmation for this, but the plan is to have nighttime forays so that you can go and hunt bioluminescent mushrooms. And we have a special lantern is being purchased, and I'm intending to get my grubby little hands on it so we can take it out the foray. Bearing in mind, Friday is actually the longest day of the year, so there's not going to be that much dark, but I'm sure we can work on it. So that's basically it. I want people to come and bring stuff. I want people to come and bring themselves, take part in the forays, and join in the dinners, which are going to be, well, it's a big community thing. The idea is you get to renew friendships, etc., from the years before, make new ones, swap out and bring out any of you got any pickles left, you got canned mushrooms, go for it. Yes, Martin.
Are you allowed to drink there?
We can't supply it. As
So you
in,
could bring
the
your
AMS
own.
bring your own. But yeah, no,
Okay.
we can't supply it. And we certainly cannot sell it. That's a definite no.
Oh, we could share it.
We can share it. Yes, just bring your own to share it. Yes. And if anybody's worried, put it in a paper bag.
And if
so
we're lucky,
that's
I
it, yes.
can. I was going to say, if we're lucky, Liz, I can potentially source us some non-alcoholic mushroom beers for solstice.
Oh, that would be really great. And I would like to put out some notices over the next, well, we've got what, 6 weeks, I think, before, no, 5 weeks. Oh,
Till the
God.
days, 5 weeks till the days start getting shorter. Oh my God. Get out there and enjoy it. And I will add one thing about the site where Liz is going is we were out there, probably about 10 years ago on the July long weekend, which is just a week after this date. And we found a whole ton of morels out there. So if you missed your morels in May, now go out to the solstice and there's a good chance you'll be able to find a whole bunch.
Excellent. Yeah, and this is the first camping weekend of the year, of the season, for the AMS. So it's a good chance to make sure your sleeping bags are all ready and working and what have you, and in preparation for other events happening through the rest of the year. And it's good fun, and I love doing up cooking, all of the big stuff. So yeah, that's it. I would like people, please, to give me your name so I can hold you accountable.
Excellent, guys. So I'll send you, we'll probably upload this video to our YouTube sometime soon. So if you missed it, you can at least catch that video there. If you're interested in joining the culinary team, just go ahead and send us an email to contact us at albertamushrooms.ca. And we'll send you a link when we have our first culinary team meeting for you to join and help out.
Okay.
And also pay attention. Hopefully we'll have a restaurant night in Edmonton. I'll challenge Sean, who's here, to see if he can get one happening in Calgary before we get one happening here in Edmonton.
I don't know, if we potentially have one going for September.
Yeah. Well, I was hoping actually in July or maybe even June. But we'll keep everybody posted on that.
Excellent. Thanks everybody for joining our webinar tonight. And yeah, everybody have a good night. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.